Super. Thank you, Laura. Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning to everyone. It's such a pleasure to be in this keynote, sharing this keynote, Liliana Obregón's keynote, for many reasons. For many reasons. So for us who are from this part of the world, it hasn't been exactly obvious how to engage with TWAIL, how to think of this way of making sense of the world, considering our own experiences and the issues that, of course, we can see in Latin America, but also in many other places in the global south. But because of the way TWAIL has been articulating the movement, the network has been articulating the ideas and the TWAIL thinking, for Latin Americans, and maybe I will just include myself, it hasn't been super obvious how to make the connections. So, and I think this conversation will actually be productive, not just for this side of the world, but I'm sure for many other places and I mean, people who's interested in thinking international law in through different lenses. So Liliana has been such a generous colleague and now a friend. Going through her work has been something that completely changed the way I think about international law and actually really enabled a broader conversation about the issues of Latin America and how we can make sense of them. So I used to have many questions. Now, are we a kind of prehistory of TWAIL? Who are we? We are late in this party. How can we have fun now, with everyone? And so for those who are dealing with history in Latin America, which is my case, your work is just illuminating, and actually I think many of us wouldn't be able to do what we are doing today without the Creole legal consciousness and also many other interventions. Your piece, Situated Histories, your piece in the Bandung collection, the Haiti articles, and all the wonderful scholarship that you have been doing. So I was super happy that I was allocated to chair you today. So Liliana, it's a pleasure to have you with us. But I will go through the official bio. So Liliana is an associate professor and director of the LLM in international law here at the Universidad de los Andes. So her research deals with international legal history and historiography, the ideologies of historical narratives, global and transnational intellectual history, with a particular interest in peripheral histories, colonialism, and forgotten actors and events of the 19th and 20th century in the Americas and also in Europe. So Liliana, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours. Very much looking forward.
Thank you so much, Fabia. Yes, yes, and thank you for the kindness that you always show me and all of us. And I have first wanted to give my sincere appreciation to the organizing team and support staff for making the remarkable TWAIL Bogotá Academy a reality. I want to acknowledge the tremendous effort that went into planning, securing economic support, and navigating all the bureaucratic hurdles to bring us all together. I think I speak on behalf of all the participants. I express our gratitude for providing us with this opportunity to connect and engage in much needed conversations, especially after the pandemic, when we learned that virtual interactions can never fully replace the significance of direct contact and close discussions. As Usha highlighted on the first day, TWAIL's essence lies in combining personal experiences and individual efforts with collective learning and political solidarity towards the global South. As a privileged group, we must recognize our responsibility, given the small percentage of the world's population holding doctoral degrees. I think it's like less than 2%, and even less in law, and even less in international law, and even fewer from the global south or TWAIL supported. Yet, as Tony pointed out yesterday, we must remember that the third world population and natural resources constitute the majority, the norm. Thus, we carry the responsibility to learn from one another, contribute to knowledge production, and influence our respected areas of concern to the best of our abilities. Therefore, in my first time role as an elder, as appointed by Sujit, or as I prefer, as maybe a pre-elder or junior elder, but maybe after last night, I'm definitely an elder. I feel responsible for providing a brief oral history of my journey into TWAIL and the history of international law in the Americas. Also, as Tony rightfully said, history is identity, history is theory, and I would also add that history is politics, as the discipline of history coincides with the formation of the modern nation state. And also, I would say that history is normative. So historical narratives have normative consequences. But my path to TWAIL was not guided by mentors or specific readings, but rather a series of circumstances and intuitions and lots of luck that led me to be at the right time and at the right place. Initially, my pursuit of law studies was driven by a desire to become a journalist and a writer, inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez and other writers from the Latin American boom generation who had studied law and then went on to more noble endeavors in their fabulous writing of that time. But my interest in history led me to major in that field as well here at Los Andes as an undergraduate in law and with a major in history. However, I soon discovered that studying law didn't really teach me how to write. I found solace as a research assistant in the first Center for International Studies at Los Andes, where I worked on one of the first reports on international human rights in Colombia. I translated the first Human Rights Watch report on Colombia, and worked on drug policy and environmental issues in their relation to Colombia, but from an international relations perspective, not so much from an international law one. But during my law school studies, Colombia was engulfed in one of its worst moments of political chaos and violence, spurring from a long history of injustice and inequality and a dangerous mix of guerrillas, drug traffickers, and corrupt politicians. Just a few blocks from here, maybe some of you have gone to the Plaza Bolivar. Have you gone? Yeah, okay. Right in the Plaza Bolivar. The M19 guerrillas took over the Palace of Justice, resulting in the loss of nearly 100 lives, including 10 Supreme Court justices. So that were foundational because at that moment, the Constitutional Court did not exist. So wiping out the Supreme Court was like a devastating impact for the country and also, of course, for all of the legal profession. A few years later, 3 presidential candidates were assassinated during an election period, adding to the thousands of people killed for political reasons before. However, a positive outcome of those turbulent times was the 1991 Constitution, which maybe you have heard about in some of the sessions here at TWAIL, that was born out of a student-led movement. So students can have impact. Partially seeking respite from the situation in Colombia, I went abroad to study a master's degree in international relations and ended up working for several years in Washington, D.C. at Conservation International that worked on Latin America and an environmental NGO, and as a human rights lawyer at the Center for Justice and International Law, litigating cases before the Inter-American System of Human Rights, where many of us start in our academic work. Despite the interesting work, I became frustrated with the lack of a comprehensive understanding of the root causes behind patterns of environmental harm and human rights violations. Additionally, NGO work often seems more symbolic than effective, and it bothered me that we were dependent on what US or European funders considered necessary to prioritize in our work in Latin America. Maybe this was a precedent to David Kennedy's our human rights, the problem article that many of you might know, but mine was intuitive at that point. However, returning to Colombia was too dangerous if I wanted to continue working in human rights. So I decided to pursue an LLM and was fortunate to be accepted and fully funded through the Human Rights Program at Harvard. During my time there, the first New Approaches to International Law conference was held, and at one of the panels, I timidly raised my hand and asked the question, so what about Latin America? You know, like it wasn't there in any of the way that they were looking at these new approaches. But although I received an unsatisfactory answer, the possibility of entering Latin America into this idea of new approaches for me was an incentive and to apply to the SJD program and also to have the possibility of working in the future with all of these wonderful people. Initially, my project proposal was a very traditional, like Colombian perspective, was focused on the history of human rights and drug policies between US and Latin America. But as I delved deeper into my studies, I realized that studying the origins of international from Latin America would be far more intriguing. Drawing from the knowledge I acquired through new approaches, the Lat crits that also were beginning there, the race crits and the fem crits, and of course the first TWAIL encounters with Macao Mutua, who was teaching a course at Harvard at that time, and Balakrishna Rajagopal, who was older than me, and also Tony Angie and James. So they were there at the same time, but they were towards the finishing part of their SJDs. And so I found many approaches and theoretical ideas of great insight and importance, except, as Fabia mentioned, not always directly applicable to the Latin American context. Of particular significance was the colonial era of Spanish America, which lasted for more than 3 centuries, while the colonial era of Africa and Asia, referred to by the first TWAILers and post-colonial scholars, was comparatively shorter, spanning less than a century and starting when the Spanish-American one was ending. So additionally, the history and structure of race in Latin America was distinct, and we had the complexities of imperialism and interventions from the United States right next door. So these are the adjustments that I had to make on my own, because I didn't have any mentors in Latin America that were doing this, but so it was a process of adaptation. So my dissertation and first publications centered around 3 prominent international lawyers representing the first half and the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. Since then, my understanding and work have evolved through further research, teaching, and collaborations, broadening my perspective on viewing Latin America and international law through a TWAIL lens and an interdisciplinary lens, I would say. So to show you my current understanding, I wanted to present a timeline, which I have to make because I didn't come early enough to do it first, but do we have time? Yeah, we're okay with time? Okay. Oh, good, we're great with time. So I think I'll be able to do it, but I need markers.
Yeah, markers.
Okay. Oh, the problem is going to be handling the microphone while drawing, while speaking.
I can help you. I will be ready.
Okay. So this is something.
Do you think you
Yeah,
can?
I think I'm gonna have to. Yeah. Okay. So maybe you can start helping me draw a line.
Yeah. throughout.
through the middle, like a straight line with, let's say blue,
Yeah.
like right through the middle.
Yes.
Okay. So this is an exercise that I do with my students, and I do it with undergrads, and I do it with my master's students, my LLM students. On the first, maybe that's too high. Okay.
Too high?
Yeah, because I'm taller. I'm shorter than you. Just like through the middle.
No.
Yeah. Look. Follow this. Let's say follow
Yeah?
this line. This one.
This one.
Okay, just follow the line. Okay. Sorry, my assistant has no practice in this. Okay, so this is something maybe pedagogical that maybe you could do in your class if you're looking for ideas that might allow you to entertain more. Yeah, all to the end. Okay. Okay. And so this is a suggestion, which what I do on the first days of class, because sometimes if you have a basic international law course for people who have never seen international law before, you have to get through the basic ideas of the structure of international law, like subjects, sources, and state responsibility, basically. So I do this before we start the class, and Mariana is laughing because she knows she's had to suffer through it. And so the students come with an essay for like the second or third day of class that they have done from the introduction to any textbook of international law. It has to be like a general international law textbook, and they have to write an essay on the historical introduction, if at all they have them, right? Like if some may not even have them. The older they are, the longer the introduction. The more contemporary ones, the shorter the historical, about which already says something, right, about international law. And so they can take, I tell them, take someone maybe from Latin America or from Europe or the United States, different time periods. So with a big class, we're able to have lots of perspectives coming from the students. Sometimes they do it just a very descriptive, like the author said that these dates and these dates and these dates matter to international law because of whatever. But some of them start having a little bit of a critical perspective, and they say, well, it was strange that I found that certain regions are not included, certain topics are not included. And, so we start building with that. So the first thing that I do is draw this timeline, and I'm going to use it today more, not to go through my whole class because we do this like in 2 days, so it's impossible. But yeah, so the first thing, okay, I mean, what I tell them first is that this is not like what we're going to do in class is not really the history of international law. Like this is not going to be a test on what you know about the history. What we're doing is looking at histories of international law and what they tell us about the discipline. And so first of all, I put the in the middle somewhere, 0. Okay. And I say, okay, what is 0? What is the foundational date of the chronology that we are currently in? The day 0. It's the birth of a person of a certain religion that defines that we are in the year 2023. So already we are in a biased timeline because it's based on the birth of one person, supposedly, and a religious, a very big religion. And also we're doing a timeline, which is straight, right? And we've seen that this imposition of a straight timeline has a narrative of progress, right? A narrative of going to the future and not looking back. So already we are in a biased timeline and we haven't even started, right? So take that into account. Now, what first comes out I always ask them, like, okay, what is the furthest back? Oh, I also tell them, okay, on the bottom part, we're going to do everything. We're going to write everything that's non-European And then on the top part, everything that's European. Okay, so the student, so I asked them first, tell me what is the oldest date that you found in the text, and what did the authors say that international law was according to that author, right? So usually it's something in the -3000s, right? But we get also some -2000s, and then more like, wait, we should be closer to 0. Actually, I'll probably move the 0, -1000, because we need the eraser. Okay. So then let's say 0 is here. I think we're proportion. Not precise at all, obviously. And then the students find here ancient civilizations, right? So they'll find China. Wait, let me make another. I make always another color for the bottom part, but then I get all my colors confused, but we'll try to do as best as we can. And with the hangover, so even worse. Okay, so we'll find, you know, China, and some will find India and Mesopotamia. Very rarely the Incas and the Aztecs, you know, very rarely. And maybe towards this time they'll find Egypt, if at all. But so so we decide that what is this? You know, why would the international law start at this moment? And so we decide, well, okay, it's ancient civilizations. And usually the idea of international law that they find is something about trade, you know, like commerce, borders, and what else? Peace and war, right? Peace and war, some type of a treaty that was found on a rock or a papyrus or some other form of print. But then I asked them, like, okay, so do you really think this is like, do the lawyers that wrote those books have any idea about how these ancient civilizations, like, could they understand these? Were they the ones that discovered this rock or this papyrus or whatever, or this understanding of trade? So then we start talking a little bit about anachronism, right? Like, okay, is this really international law as we understand it today? So let's say if we want to be anachronistic, we say, okay, well, you know, we really don't understand these civilizations. We don't know if that was what the meaning. There's ideas of certain types of faith structures that they have that we possibly don't comprehend today, et cetera, et cetera. So then we go into the anachronism part and say, but wait a minute, what if we don't, you know, care about the anachronism? Who would actually state that these are the origins of international law? And so I asked them if they know, if they had anything in their text about decolonization, right? Like, who would put the origins in ancient civilizations? It could be a political move of decolonization, right? Of decolonized states, and them wanting to use these origins to say, we are not new nations, we're actually very old nations, and we have had international law way before you did, European states. So don't call us new nations. We've had international law way before you did. So it's also a political move in the way of bringing back these ancient civilizations. Okay, so fast forward now to connect to the Latin American story, which is why we're here today. We go, well, fast forward to, okay, then we put the big name that is going to be covering possibly until today. Now this red one doesn't write. Oh, okay. Let's see if I can find another color. Christianity. I forgot how to write Christianity. CH or CR? CH. No, it looks wrong. CR. Yeah, in English? Okay. I don't know why I forgot to. Christianity. Okay. Right. So that will be the overarching narrative, maybe even until today. And it will cover the next centuries, and it will definitely have an impact in the Latin American states. And so we start looking at different dates in which to locate the Latin American story. So there's, okay, in Europe, here's like the, I don't know, the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. And then suddenly we have, which my red one doesn't work anymore, 1492. Fabia, mi bolsa, creo que hay uno rojo. Sí. Okay, so we have 1492, right? Okay, so that could be, that seems to be an origin narrative for, yes, perfect. An origin narrative for many of them, of some of the authors, especially like the early Latin American authors, but also some of the Spanish authors of international law. And we have like up here, we would have, you know, Francisco de Victoria, because then we start getting some names, right? Francisco de Victoria, but we have also the big issue here of my purple, conquest and colonization. What? Where's my purple? Okay, I lost the purple. Ah, here it is. Thank you. Okay, so we would have, you know, conquest and colonization. And of course, slavery. They will not find this in their text, right? Like there are, I don't think there are like TWAIL handbooks of the general international law handbooks yet. We don't have textbooks that are like TWAIL. So we say like, okay, why is this missing in this narrative? Like we explained that the idea of the missing narratives, what is not in international law, even though slavery was or conquest and colonization was all legally supported by in the Spanish colonial system. It was legal to conquer, and there's a law of colonization, right? And the principles of colonization and of slavery, but this is left out. And so also for our non-Latin Americans, that this is the point that I made before when I was presenting the introduction. This period, as you can see, lasts until the time of, we can move this back so we can, here, yeah, okay. This period lasts until the, we need now the blue line. Okay. The period lasts until the 1810s, 1810, roughly 1810 to 1825. Okay. And just a few states towards the end of the century. And if we include Brazil, it's really until the end, Brazil and Cuba, it's more towards the end of the century. But the majority of Spanish American states will have their independence movement. That's what we're celebrating today in Colombia, 20th of July. during this period. Around 20 states become independent during this period. And so what does that mean in terms of European international law, which has been the norm until then? That these states, especially with the first publication of Andrés Bello, 1832, has the first publication of Andrés Bello, Principles of the Law of Nations. But with an American perspective, an American was the term used to refer to themselves as well, the Latin Americans. So Latin America is a term coined in the 1850s. So 1850 is when Latin America is coined as a term in reaction to the United States appropriating the notion of America, right? So the United States not only begins its imperialism in the region, right, taking over Mexico, Treaty of Guadalupe, and later, unfortunately, I didn't bring my map, but this is a big moment of U.S. interventions in the region. And the United States, I think I don't have the map, but the U.S. is just the east coast of what we know it is today. And it gained approximately 1/3 of its territory through what it won through the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe. So 1845, that's a big problem for the Latin American states. And also, have you heard of William Walker in Nicaragua? No? So a mercenary, John is saying yes, a mercenary, yes, a mercenary who, a U.S. mercenary, and he was also a lawyer. He was actually a quite sophisticated person in terms of his education. He goes into Nicaragua and claims Nicaragua as part, that he is the ruler of Nicaragua, and that now Nicaragua will be part of the United States. And that's in around 1855, and he reinstitutes slavery. So slavery had been abolished during this period, gradually abolished, like it was a long process, because many of the slaves fought in the independence wars. And so a way to get more people to fight in the independence wars was to grant them their freedom. So 1855 is around this period is, or 1845, I don't remember well, but it's William Walker. And of course, we forgot the Monroe Doctrine, 1823, right? So, see, I'm already confusing all my colors. It's so hard when you're not in your best moments. Okay, so Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine, okay, 1823. So Monroe Doctrine, I'm sure everybody's heard of the Monroe Doctrine, right? So Monroe Doctrine was emitted in 1823 as, well, by President Monroe in the US, as to avoid or to take a stand on European colonialism, but towards the United States, right? So we will not allow Europe to interfere in our region. And the Latin Americans, or the not yet Latin Americans, Spanish Americans, recently independent, said, oh, that's a great idea. We're with you with that. The Monroe Doctrine, we think it's great. And in 1826, there is, 1826, there is a Congress in Panama, the Panama Congress, or Congreso de Panama, in 1826, led by Simón Bolívar. So this is crazy. Everyone knows Simón Bolívar, the independence leader. And if you had time, I hope some of you have time, his house is right next to the university, right? So it's a house you can visit. Well, one of his houses, one of the places where he stayed. It's right next to the university when you live here, and it's a really nice place to visit and to connect to this story. So Simón Bolívar says we have to have a meeting of all of the states of the Americas. In his ambition, it was to unite all of the Latin American states, because he said, like, we have such a huge territory that if we unite and become one state, Colombia was the original idea of the state, then we can be protected from European intervention. Still not thinking about US intervention, right? Like US imperialism was more European. And they have this Congress. Think about how hard it was for you to get here in 2023. Think about in 1826, meeting in Panama, coming from all the way from the United States to Argentina. Those were the name was in Argentina at that time, but coming from the south to the middle. And Bolivar's idea was that this would be similar to the Greek amphithyonic congresses of the Greeks and the Romans, which I forgot on my timeline, is when the idea of civilization goes to Europe, right? So Greeks and Romans, right? And then Christianity, right? So it shifts from, like, many people in the 19th century gave the origin of civilization to the Egyptians. And it changes more or less mid-19th century because of the concept of race. Like, Egypt is in Africa, and they, so it goes and, like, no, let's say the Greeks and the Romans really are the origins of civilization, even though they borrowed a lot from Egypt, right? So, for Simón Bolívar, centuries later, his idea of a classic civilization and his European education as well was that we could do something similar to Europeans, but in our own territory. And this is where the idea of the Creole legal consciousness comes from. Like, we can borrow from, we're also European, and there's a famous phrase that Simón Bolívar has. We have the conundrum that we are from the Europeans, we are living with the native indigenous people that are from this land, and we are somewhere in between. But we have the authority to rule over this because we are, closer to the Europeans, but we are in the native. So we can borrow, we can mix all of this and come up with new ideas and new laws for ourselves. But we have to recognize where we're coming from. Okay, so the Panama Congress, a few of some even died on the way to get there. I think the US representatives died on the way to get there. But what is happening in the US to connect to this story? 1860 is the Civil War. So US Civil War. No, it's US, anything that's non-European goes below. So, I mean, if it's imperialism, we could say, but US Civil War, and the connection is that the US says, okay, we'll go to the Panama Congress. And they have a great debate about this in the US Senate. And here's a tip for all of the scholars, the newer scholars that are just doing historical work. Always go to the original sources. Don't trust the citations. Go to the original sources if you can, and in the original language if you can, because you'll find things that some have cited incorrectly, or they left out half a page or something that was actually more interesting to your work. And so always go to the original sources when possible. So there's a whole debate in the US Congress of to go or not to go to Panama. And the question was Haiti. So Haiti. So remember here, we have, the US in the 17. So we have 1789, the French Revolution, and then 1786, right? That's like so confused. And we also have in the region, we have 1776 and 1790. So US independence, revolution, and Haitian Revolution. Okay, so the Latin Americans or Spanish Americans still admired the Haitians for their revolution, because the Haitians defeated the biggest empires, right? Like they defeated the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire. Like even though they lost half their population on the way, they fought tooth and nail through all of this period for their independence. Like possibly the truest revolution in the sense of real overthrow of the government and coming from slavery, which just to go back to my articles, the first time I heard that was in a course on global history here at Los Andes when I was a student. I was like, why don't we all know this? Like, what? How could like this happen? Like a whole group of slaves overthrew the French Empire. And I always had that in my background until I was finally able to research it and write about it. Seeing that there was not much done from like an international law perspective. So the U.S. and the U.S. representatives or the U.S. Congress said we will not go if Haiti goes, because if Haiti goes, Haiti had already declared independence by 1804, right? So 1804, they declare independence, and they really, really wanted to be recognized, right? Recognition was essential for them to be able to do more on the international plane. And this was before France imposed the recognition debt on them. So their chance was to be recognized at the Panama Congress. But that exactly was what the US didn't want, because the US had slavery, right? So they could not, even just the diplomacy of it was complicated. Like, how do we like greet in diplomatic ways people who were slaves? So they had all these ideas of you cannot have diplomacy with people who were former slaves, and also they don't really have the right to sovereignty. So this was one of the big debates before. So Simón Bolívar, and there's I think it's a fake sword here at the house next door. It's a fake sword, but he gives a sword. He said Pétion, the president of Haiti at that time, offers Bolívar support on more, I think, 2 big occasions, offers him support with ships, with ammunition, with men to fight the independence war, because nobody was supporting Bolívar in his own territory. So Bolívar went to Haiti, and Pétion said, okay, I'll give you all this with one condition, that you abolish slavery, right? But that was his only condition. And so that he later Bolívar sent him a sword, which is supposedly in the house next to Los Andes, saying, we really owe our independence to you, Simón, to Haiti, to Pétion. And today, I'm sure nobody will say that in the celebration of the independence of Colombia, because that story is always taken out of, I wonder why, but it's not something that we celebrate as part of the Day of Independence, that we should, right? So this is a defining moment in where international law begins to, they even use the term no, it's still law of nations, but they use the term like we should unite our law for the region in order to integrate each other. It was sort of a pre-European Union, like this was like a foundation because they had ideas of monetary integration. They had ideas of educational integration, transboundary, like that everyone could cross the borders. They were Americanos, so they could go from one state to the other. Of course, we're talking about men, and we're talking about literate men, right? Like, and propertied men, right? That's another thing that is going to be left that I forgot in my history. That's super important from a TWAIL perspective. All of this is about men, and in Latin America, we have the right to vote for women is a very new thing. It's the second half of the 20th century. It's a 20th century thing, right? So in Colombia, the right to vote for women was 1954, 58, 54, 1954. Like that's yesterday, like, you know, so like my grandmother couldn't vote. So half the population in most of this history are not citizens, right? And then, well, if we add racial and literacy and financial requirements for voting, for being citizens, that's even less of the people who were in the possibility to even have these discussions about statehood and sovereignty and all of this. So the Panama Congress, important in that sense. Andres Bello's book in 1860s. And here is another thing that, even though I would say that is not part of the Latin American story in general, is that, okay, we have the concept of civilization, which I think we could put also on top here, civilization. And this is a cue that I followed from Tony Angie, because I read his dissertation before he published his book. And he talks about civilization a lot. It's like, I wonder how it works in the Latin American context, because that seems to be a strong concept. And yeah, it ended up being throughout the 19th century, all over the world, into the 20th century, one of the most fundamental, though we don't really know what it means. And that's why I wrote a whole article on the civilized and the uncivilized to understand what it means. But this civilizational idea is what defines many of the policies that will go into the 20th century, in 19th and 20th century. Let me see, I see we are running out of time, but there's so many things. Okay, now I remember. For the proto-historians or historians in the room, one thing that we also helped me to understand narratives of history is that the concept of time, as we understand it today, is also new, right? The concept of time. So we have, Darwin in the mid-19th century. Newton. I think Newton is further back. We have, well, let's say the Enlightenment, right? But it's further back. Enlightenment starts in the 17th century, 18th century, Enlightenment. So the concept of Enlightenment or what's coming out of the Enlightenment is questioning this Christian apocalyptical view of the future. So right today we talk so much in terms of identities and progress, and we've looked at this concept of civilization, but until the Enlightenment begins questioning the role of natural law or the role of God in determining the future with an apocalyptic perspective, like we all are born as a woman or as a slave or as a king, and that is determined by God, right? And therefore we have to stick in stay in that place because God decided that we're born there. And that works very well for the kings, right? But not so much for everyone else, because but that is how you can maintain, especially a colonial project like the Latin American one or the Spanish American colony for 300 years, because people are put into place. There is some social mobility through the caste system, which I'll explain in a moment, but the understanding that you are determined, your fate is determined by God, is maintained throughout centuries in Christianity until we get to the Enlightenment. So even the way, like the biblical history, like you could not until around this time, and even Darwin, it was complicated for Darwin. He was very much criticized for his theory of evolution. But until this period, if you did not use the Bible as your first historical source, then you were wrong, right? Like the Chinese saying that their civilization was or going thousands of years, they were just wrong, because the earth did not exist until for 6,000 years. It was a 6,000-year-old timeline, right? So anything past 6,000 years is a lie in biblical terms. And the origin narratives, Adam and Eve or the flood, those are some of the ways that the origin of humanity begins and the story of the world. So to question that is really a new thing as well. So we have to assume that the understanding of time is not the same for anyone before the mid-19th century. It's a different understanding of time. So maybe that might be helpful for some of you that are going back in this period. Okay, so 1860s. Let me see what else could be important here. Okay, and during all of these periods, there are Pan-American Congresses, like after the first Congress in 1826, there are many Congresses throughout the 19th century where these Latin American states meet. And then we get to the 20th century with World War I, World War II, and the foundation of the UN, etc. Okay, which are the majority of the states participating in the foundation of the UN? The Latin American states, because they're the biggest group. And of the 51 states that founded the United Nations, 22, I think, were the Latin American states. Okay, and here I forgot to mention, so the term Latin America is coined, and for the first time it's used in a text by Carlos Calvo. Okay, so I think we can stop there, maybe put and there's tons to go, but my idea was like maybe for those who don't know this story, it could put you into context. Yeah, do we have time? What is the? Okay, so then let's not do this. We can just leave it as a background. Yeah.
Sí, eso.
Sí, okay. No,
Yeah, we're working for your satisfaction. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm not good.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a map of the Spanish Empire. There was a map of the Spanish Empire. Yeah. Okay, so everything that's in color was the Spanish Empire until about
19th century. Different colors mean different things, but basically, roughly, we're going to do a speed presentation. And during this imperial, the colonial period, the Spanish American society was divided into a very hierarchical, was divided into a hierarchical structure where the Spaniards born in Spain were at the top, Creoles, which were considered Spanish, who were born in the Americas of Spanish parents, and then mestizos and all of the mixtures, and at the bottom, Native American Indians and enslaved, and I would say also liberated slaves or free blacks, and then finally enslaved persons. So roughly that, but then it got complicated because the different strata starting to mix, and the Spanish decided to educate people on where their position in society was. So there are these casta paintings. You can see some at the National Museum, and also I think in the Independence Museum here. There are a few casta paintings. They never explain them, but the origin is that they were teaching illiterate people where their place in society was. So they would go into great detail of showing like, okay, what your mixture was. And this is why it was called castas, a caste system. And we were talking with Sujit about, the differences, but the term caste was used. And each place in society would determine what access to certain resources you had. Like even until the 19th century, I think, to get into a law school, you had to, be a man, first of all, of course, be literate, right, but also prove your whiteness. Like you had to have a certificate of whiteness, and you could buy, those certificates could be bought. This is different from the US system. 1 drop of blood means you're black. No, this you could, so culturally, economically, socially, make your way up the system and buy your certificate of whiteness, even if your skin wasn't white, let's say. So these are some of the mixtures. That's interesting, the way that they place black people, but okay. So we have all of these mixtures. Some of them are so bad, like this one, which is called The Wolf Returns Backward and Indian Makes Older. So, I mean, it's a really complicated category because both mixtures are so bad that they go backwards instead of advancing in the structure. Their mixtures make them go backwards. Anyway. Okay, so the idea of the Creole legal consciousness that you've heard, that was in my text, comes from this notion of the Creole. And I have the Museum of the Americas because it's a very strange way of looking at the Americas from Spain. If you go, it's today, if you go, well, I can't stop on that, but visit it, especially for the Latin Americans, and you'll see how they portray even today the Americas. So this idea of the Creole, we still use today in all sorts of mixtures, many in animals, right? The mixtures that means that they were mixtures that were native to Americas, but come from some type of a mixture, right? And it's also used in all sorts of cultural events and in food, and the basic idea is mixture and something American as the continent. I found this is a graffiti in Bogotá that I think doesn't exist anymore, but it says surrealism, Creole surrealism. Okay, so independence, all of these new states, they follow the Spanish laws for a while, but then the Andrés Bello and others start making law and language, even the Spanish language, for the region. So Andrés Bello, and here's what I have defined as pre-legal consciousness. It's in the text, but too long to explain. And the other part of it is the will to civilization. So the will to civilization, and you can also find that explained in the text that was assigned, makes this idea of real consciousness. Okay, so here are some of the texts and some of the people. But I think I wanted to. No, pero es que ya tengo otra parte. You can look at it up in the text. It was supposed to be an overview. I think I did too much in too little time, and especially with the hangovers. So, okay. So, okay. So my last part of the presentation, that was to show a little bit of my old work, but then I want to address something new. So, I'm going to read because I can't do other way. Okay. So these historical narratives, my own and what I've learned from my colleagues, have paved the way for the understanding of my own work and the current Oxford Handbook project that I am involved in as a senior editor or an elder, along with Laura and Juan who's Juan, and Daniela, of course. So the four of us were editing an Oxford handbook on international law in the Americas, the OHILA, as we call it. So before the pandemic, I was offered the opportunity to edit this handbook, but before accepting, I asked if I could change the focus from Latin America to the broader Americas, and if I could choose my own editorial team and authors. Fortunately, Oxford agreed to both requests, recognizing that these had substantive implications for the production of knowledge. First of all, in terms of scope, international law in and from the Americas is often misunderstood and underrepresented. To begin with, the name America was taken from an Italian explorer in the 16th century and reappropriated by the United States as its identifier in the 19th century, without any connection to the native inhabitants of the continent. Even today, the role of the United States in international law is often viewed in isolation from the rest of the Americas, as if it were more relevant to Europe than its neighboring states, despite most of the construction of international law in the region being in response to US imperialism and the states and regions adapting to the dynamics of the Cold War. Additionally, knowledge about the post-colonial legal systems across the region is scarce, despite their relevance to international law today. The Americas encompass a vast geographical area that includes Canada, the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as the historical legacies of Spanish, French, British, French, and Portuguese colonialism, and the enduring impact of the bipolar alliances of the Cold War. In fact, we could say that the Americas is a universal continent, where either by force or voluntarily, there are descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants, European colonizers, African slaves, Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, and Turkish labor immigrants, Jewish, Nazi, and thousands of other refugees fleeing from the European world wars, and most recently, environmental and economic migrants from all over the world. In addition, the construction of any canonical type of book raises important questions from authority or authorship. Who writes and from what perspective? We have to remember that for centuries, half the population has been excluded as subjects or as producers of international law and its history. Women as full citizens with the right to vote, be elected, receive a college education, have property, and take jobs independent of the consent of their fathers or their husbands is a 20th century phenomenon in the Americas and of course in the rest of the world. And it hasn't even been completed totally in the world. Even more recent are women as students in law schools, members of the legal profession, law professors, and deans. In this century, the increase of women in the legal professions has been exponential, with the majority of law students and professors in most law schools from Canada to Uruguay now being women. In my own law school, we have the appointment of 3 consecutive female deans in the past decade, and more recently, the first female president of our university. Therefore, in assembling the editorial team and authors, my first thought was that was about gender parity and representation. In this regard, half of us are female, Laura and myself, but we are obviously failed in being Colombian-centric and connected to Los Andes, though we are all actively engaged in academic networks in Latin America and internationally, including TWAIL, IGLP, Law and Society, LASA, and others. We believe that the conversion of our own critical traditions and knowledge of the region's history, combined with our academic training in Colombia and abroad, has given us the tools to select a group of scholars. Some of you are in this room and owe us in our chapter, to select a group of scholars that will make an important revision of the history of international law from the region. With more than 60 authors, we have managed gender parity and a significant balance of perspectives, some more traditional, others more radical, some renowned, others just beginning their careers, historians and legal scholars, and except for 2 Europeans located in the US, the authors represent all the states of the Americas. The OHILA handbook begins with a general introduction that provides an overview of the theories and approaches to international law in the region. So all of this history that I tried to tell in a few minutes is well thought out in the handbook. The topical chapters highlight the contextual and historical trajectory of contemporary issues, and each chapter's authors engage in debates about the history and theory of international law within their specific topic or country, even if they are not, if they feel they're not historians. We have asked them to historicize or contextualize their chapters. This includes considering the context of imperialism, statehood, sovereignty, non-intervention, development, the international economic order, and the critical traditions of international law. Moreover, the country chapters are written by scholars from their respective states. We have allowed for the chapters to be written in the language of the author's preference and then translated to English if necessary. The original articles written in Spanish or Portuguese will be used in another handbook. And if the articles were written in English and we want to put them in the Spanish or Portuguese version, we will get them translated. While this may seem like a logical and straightforward process, in reality, it represents a significant accomplishment as the existing knowledge about the Americas is fragmented and not connected. The first section begins with the colonial era, which spanned 3 centuries of European colonial rule. This period laid the foundations of imperial governance, establishing racial, gendered, religious, and economic structures that would leave an indelible mark on the law of nations in the Americas and state formation in the 19th centuries. Chapters within this section will explore topics such as defining imperial spaces, land rights, Spanish juridical forms of conquest, slavery, freedom, and the intricate relation between colonial racialized categories of peoples, the ones that I just showed you, and their relation to governance and the structure of society. The second section focuses on the 19th century, where we cover the revolutions and declarations of independence from the US and Haiti, and their impact and spread across the region and the world. We have a chapter on the rise of regional conferences, integration projects, the formulation of the Monroe, Calvo, Drago, Tobar, and Estrada doctrines that somebody owes a chapter that encapsulates the principles of non-intervention, territorial sovereignty, and the rights of newly independent nations vis-a-vis European and US interventions in the region. The relation of race and citizenship in the new Spanish American states is represented in another chapter, shedding light on the complex dynamics of identity and the legal frameworks during this period. The third section is related to the first half of the 20th century, which marks a crucial turning point as regionalism and customary law take center stage. This era witnessed the birth of a Latin American international law movement characterized by the efforts of professional diplomats and international lawyers who challenged the growing power of the United States while embracing Pan-Americanism. This era witnessed the promotion of regional doctrines of non-intervention, political asylum, principles of solidarity, culminating in the establishment of the first permanent court of justice in Central America, dispute settlement mechanisms within regional blocs, and the founding of the American Institute of International Law in Havana in 1912. In this period, we also have an important chapter on the early stages of the Pan-American feminist movement and its impact on women's suffrage across the region. As we venture into the second half of the century, the 20th century, the foundation of the United Nations and the Organization of American States takes center stage. The Latin American stage played a significant role in the UN, with nearly half of the founding states hailing from the Americas. This period witnessed a surge of international and non-governmental organizations amidst the backdrop of the Cold War. And this is, that was one of the big words I forgot, Cold War, right? Like we are, contemporary international law is a product of the Cold War, nothing to do about. That's something that sometimes we also forget in our historical work. Human rights emerged as a pivotal language of international law, providing a framework for addressing authoritarian regimes and social democratic struggles. The newly independent nations from Africa and Asia shared their unique positions with Latin American states, giving rise to innovative approaches to the practice, teaching, and critique of international law in the region. Chapters within this section also explore the Haitian, Mexican, and Cuban revolutions, together with human rights, indigenous peoples' rights, gender, and feminism. Other chapters include the drug wars, peace agreements, and the law of the sea. The 21st century begins with a wave of neoliberal privatization following the end of the Cold War and beginning the war on terrorism. International economic issues such as development, trade, investment, and commercial arbitration take center stage. We also witness the increased importance of social movements and NGOs in shaping global discourse, while climate change emerges as a pressing concern, with the Americas housing some of the most biodiverse areas in the world. Chapters in this section will also analyze sex and gender, international debt, international criminal law, environmental law, disaster law, global administrative law, international legal education, and the intersection of international law and constitutional law. Finally, the TWAIL provides insights into the histories of individual countries in the region. For example, the Panama chapter centers around the struggle over the Panama Canal, first by the French, then by the US, and its pivotal role in the country's independence and later decolonization from it. Nicaragua is the state with most cases before the International Court of Justice, beginning with the famous case that we all teach and study against the US, offering a unique tradition in the use of the court for its foreign policy and relations. Up to this day, Nicaragua uses the court. That's where they do their foreign policy and see what they can get out of the court. Brazil, as the site of Portuguese empire, the last to abolish slavery and become independent in the region, and a strong school of international lawyers and diplomats throughout the 20th century. In conclusion, the TWAIL is a monumental work that sheds light on the multifaceted history of international law in the region. It not only presents traditional historical approaches, but also incorporates critical perspectives, contextualizing the chapters, even when the authors are not historians of international law. And by exploring the colonial era and the struggles for independence, regionalism, the Cold War, and the contemporary challenges of the 21st century, this handbook provides a comprehensive understanding of the development in international law in the Americas through an underlying TWAIL perspective. I think the four editors, we all have had that perspective in mind while we were building this. We believe that this version, as well as the ones we hope to publish in Spanish and Portuguese, will aid in teaching and inspire further research analysis and different ways of using and understanding international law from the Americas. And there I can finally finish. Okay, right on time. See, congratulate me.
Yes, yeah. Okay, many thanks, Liliana. And so it's clear that it makes a huge difference to talk about international law from different places in the world. So spatiality is definitely a thing, and chapter will come for sure.